I stood on the platform, the cold biting through my coat as the train's taillights vanished into the fog. My suitcase, small and battered, sat at my feet like a loyal dog, the only thing keeping me company. The station was desolate, a ghost town of wet concrete and flickering lamps. My son, David, was supposed to be here. He'd promised. "I'll pick you up, Mom," he'd said. His voice clipped over the phone, the way it always was when he spoke to me now. I'd traveled 3 hours, my bones aching from the journey, my heart heavier than the luggage I carried. But he wasn't here. The realization settled in slowly, like frost creeping over a window pane. He'd left me stranded. Again. I should have known better than to trust him. But hope is a stubborn thing, clinging to the edges of a mother's heart even when it's been bruised one too many times. The wind howled, carrying the faint whistle of a distant train. I pulled my scarf tighter, my fingers trembling not just from the cold, but from the memories that flooded back. David wasn't always like this. There was a time when he'd run to me, his small hands tugging at my skirt, his laughter filling our old house with warmth. Back then, he was my shadow, my pride, the boy who'd sit on the porch with me, counting stars while his father worked late. But that was before the lies, before the betrayal, before the world turned him into someone I'd barely recognized. Now, at 67, I was alone at a train station in the middle of nowhere, waiting for a son who'd rather leave me to the elements than face me. I could still see his face the last time we spoke in person, 2 years ago. His jaw was tight, his eyes cold, accusing me of things I hadn't done, things his wife, Clara, had whispered into his ear. She'd always had a way of twisting truths, her voice smooth as silk but sharp as a blade. "You're holding him back, Eleanor," she'd said once, her lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "He deserves more than your little world." She'd convinced him I was the enemy, that I was clinging to him out of selfishness, not love. And David, my David, had believed her. He'd chosen her over me, over the woman who'd raised him, who'd sacrificed everything for him. The station clock ticked past 9. No headlights broke the darkness. No familiar car pulled up to rescue me. My chest tightened, not with sadness, but with something hotter, sharper anger. I'd spent years swallowing it, burying it beneath apologies and excuses for his absence. But tonight, standing in the rain, I felt it rise like a tide. He thought he could discard me, that I was nothing more than an inconvenience to his perfect life. He didn't know what I carried in my suitcase, what I'd kept hidden all these years. The keys to his inheritance, the truth about his father's fortune, the legacy he thought he'd already claimed. It was all in my hands. And he had no idea. I dragged my suitcase to the bench and sat, the cold metal biting into my thighs. My mind wandered back to the day David was born, the weight of him in my arms, the way his tiny fingers curled around mine. I'd promised him the world, and I'd meant it. His father, Thomas, was a hard man, but he'd built something real, a business, a name, a fortune. When he died, I made sure it was preserved for David, even when he turned his back on me. I'd kept the documents safe, the ones that proved he was entitled to everything, not just the scraps Clara thought they'd won. She'd manipulated him into thinking the estate was settled, that the money was theirs. But I knew better. I'd always known better. The rain began to fall harder, soaking through my coat. I didn't move. Let it come, I thought. Let it wash away the years of guilt I'd carried for not fighting harder, for letting Clara drive a wedge between us. I'd been too soft, too forgiving. But not anymore. If David thought he could leave me here, stranded and forgotten, he was wrong. I wasn't just his mother, I was the keeper of his future. And I'd make sure he understood that. The anger in my chest burned brighter, mingling with a strange, thrilling sense of purpose. I'd waited long enough. It was time to take back what was mine, to show him the cost of betrayal. I opened my suitcase, my fingers brushing against the leather folder inside. It held everything: deeds, contracts, the will Thomas had written before he died. David thought he'd inherited the business, the house, the money. But there was more. So much more. Locked away in a trust only I could access. Clara had no idea. Neither did he. I kept it secret, waiting for the day he'd prove himself worthy of it. But that day never came. Instead, he'd chosen to abandon me, to leave me standing in the rain like I was nothing. My grip tightened on the folder. This wasn't just about money, it was about justice. About making him see what he'd done. A car's headlights finally pierced the fog. But they weren't David's. A taxi, its engine idling, pulled up to the platform. The driver leaned out, his face weathered and kind. "You need a ride, ma'am?" he asked. I hesitated, glancing at the empty road where David should have been. Then I nodded, picking up my suitcase. "Take me to the nearest hotel," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. As the taxi pulled away, I looked back at the station, a shadow in the rain. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. David had made his choice, and now I'd make mine. The hotel room smelled of stale coffee and cheap air freshener. But it was dry, and that was enough for now. I sat on the edge of the bed, my suitcase open beside me, the leather folder resting in my lap like a ticking bomb. My hands trembled as I opened it, the papers crisp and heavy with secrets. Thomas's handwriting stared back at me, sharp and deliberate, the way he'd always been. For David, he'd written on the first page of the will, to be entrusted to Eleanor until he proves his loyalty. Loyalty. The word felt like a blade now, cutting deeper with every memory of David's absence. I closed the folder and pressed it to my chest, my heart pounding with a mix of grief and resolve. The rain tapped against the window, a steady rhythm that matched the thoughts racing through my mind. I'd spent years protecting David, shielding him from the truth about his father's expectations, from the weight of the legacy he was meant to carry. Thomas had built an empire: real estate, investments, a name that opened doors. But he'd known David was too young, too reckless, to handle it then. So he'd left it to me, his wife, his partner, to decide when David was ready. I'd waited, hoping he'd grow into the man his father believed he could be. But Clara had changed him, twisted him into someone who saw me as an obstacle, not a mother. I thought back to the day she entered our lives, all charm and ambition, her eyes gleaming with something I didn't trust. David was 25, fresh out of college, eager to prove himself. Clara was his boss at the firm, older by a decade, with a smile that could sell sand in a desert. She saw his potential, his name, his connection to Thomas's fortune, and she latched on. Within a year, they were married, and I was pushed to the sidelines. "You're too controlling," she'd say, her voice dripping with false concern. "Let him live his life." And David, my sweet boy, believed her. He stopped calling, stopped visiting, stopped caring. The folder in my hands held the power to change everything. It wasn't just money, it was control, influence, the kind of wealth that could reshape lives. Thomas had set up a trust, one that Clara and David thought they'd already tapped into. But they'd only scratched the surface. The real fortune, the properties, the offshore accounts, the share sit was all locked away, accessible only through me. I'd kept it hidden, Not out of greed, but out of love. Waiting for David to show he deserved it. But tonight, standing in the rain, I'd realized something. Love wasn't enough anymore. He'd made his choice. And now I had to make mine. I stood and paced the small room, my reflection flickering in the dark window. The woman staring back at me looked older, harder, her eyes sharp with purpose. I wasn't the same Eleanor who'd begged David to visit, who'd sent him birthday cards he never acknowledged. I was done being invisible. The anger that had sparked at the station was growing, feeding on years of hurt, of being dismissed and discarded. I wanted him to feel what I'd felt, to understand the cost of his betrayal. But more than that, I wanted him to see Minute as his mother, but as the woman who held his future in her hands. The phone on the nightstand sat silent. No missed calls, no texts, no apology from David. I picked it up, my fingers hovering over his number. I could call him, demand an explanation. But what would that change? He'd made it clear where I stood in his life. Instead, I dialed another number, one I hadn't called in years. It belonged to Marcus, Thomas's old lawyer, the only person who knew the full extent of the trust. Eleanor, he answered, his voice warm but cautious. It's been a long time. I need to see you, I said, my voice steady. It's about the trust. There was a pause, then a soft chuckle. I was wondering when you'd call. We arranged to meet in the city, 2 days from now. I hung up, feeling a strange calm settle over me. The plan was forming, piece by piece, like a puzzle I'd been too afraid to solve until now. David thought he'd won, that he and Clara had taken everything. But they didn't know the game wasn't over. I lay back on the bed, the folder still clutched to my chest. The rain outside had slowed, but the storm inside me was just beginning. I thought of David's face, the way he'd looked at me 2 years ago, his eyes full of resentment. You're holding me back, he'd said, echoing Clara's words. Back then, I'd cried, begged him to see the truth. Now, I felt something else, determination, cold and unyielding. He'd left me at the station, but I wasn't stranded anymore. I had the keys, and I'd use them to unlock a reckoning he'd never see coming. Marcus's office was in a sleek high-rise, all glass and steel, a world away from the small town where I'd raised David. The receptionist ushered me in, and I found Marcus waiting, his silver hair neatly combed, his suit as crisp as ever. Eleanor, he said, standing to greet me, his eyes searching mine. You look different. I smiled faintly, wondering what he saw. The grief, the anger, or something new, something harder. I feel different, I said, setting my suitcase down. I'm ready to talk about the trust. We sat, and I opened the folder, spreading the documents across his desk. Marcus's eyes scanned the pages, his expression unreadable. You've kept this quiet for a long time, he said finally. Why now? I leaned back, my hands folded tightly in my lap. David left me at the train station last night. Didn't show up. Didn't call. I'm done waiting for him to remember who I am. Marcus nodded, his fingers tapping the desk. And what do you want to do with it? He asked. I took a deep breath, the words forming before I could second-guess them. I want to take it back. All of it. Marcus raised an eyebrow, but he didn't argue. He knew the terms of the trust as well as I did. Thomas had given me full control, a safeguard against David's youth and impulsiveness. The business, the properties, the accounts, they were mine to manage until I deemed him worthy. And he wasn't. Not anymore. It won't be easy, Marcus warned. David and Clara have already taken possession of the main estate, and the company's primary assets. Legally, they think they've won. I leaned forward, my voice low. They don't know about the rest. The offshore accounts. The hidden properties. I want to use them to make them feel what I've felt. Marcus studied me, his gaze steady. This isn't just about money, is it? He asked. I shook my head, my throat tightening. It's about justice. He betrayed me. Marcus. He chose her over me, over everything I did for him. I want him to see what he's lost. Marcus leaned back, his fingers steepled. Revenge is a dangerous game, Eleanor. But if you're sure, I can start the process. We'll need to move carefully. Clara's sharp, and she won't let go without a fight. I nodded, my heart pounding. I'm ready. The rest of the meeting was a blur of legal terms and strategies. Marcus outlined how we'd transfer the hidden assets, how we'd challenge David's claim to the estate. Every word felt like a step toward reclaiming my power, my dignity. But beneath it all, there was a flicker of doubt. Was I doing this for justice? Or was it something darker? I pushed the thought away. David had made his choice, and now I'd make mine. As I left the office, the city felt different, sharper, more alive. I walked to a nearby cafe, ordered a coffee, and sat by the window, watching the world rush by. My phone buzzed, and I glanced at it, expecting nothing. But there it was, a text from David. Sorry about last night. Got tied up. Can we talk? I stared at the words, my pulse quickening. Part of me wanted to call him, to scream, to demand why he'd left me there. But another part, the part that had grown cold at the station, told me to wait, to play this carefully. I typed a reply, my fingers steady. I'm in the city. Meet me tomorrow at the house. I hit send, my heart racing. The house, our old family home. The one David and Clara now lived in. The one they thought was theirs. It was the perfect place to start. I sipped my coffee, the bitterness matching the resolve settling in my bones. David didn't know what was coming. He didn't know I held the keys to everything he thought he owned. And tomorrow, I'd make sure he started to understand. The house loomed before me, its brick facade unchanged since the days when David's laughter echoed through its halls. I stood at the gate, my suitcase in hand, the weight of the folder inside grounding me. This was where it all began, where Thomas built his empire, where I raised our son, where Clara had taken root like a weed. The front door opened before I could knock, and there was David, his face a mix of guilt and impatience. Mom, he said, his voice tight. You didn't have to come all the way here. I smiled, though it felt more like a grimace. You didn't give me much choice, David. He stepped aside, letting me in. The house smelled different now, like expensive candles and Clara's perfume. Not the warm scent of home it used to be. Clara was in the living room, perched on a leather sofa, her blonde hair perfect, her smile calculated. Eleanor, she said, standing to greet me, her tone dripping with false warmth. What a surprise. I nodded, my eyes locked on hers. Is it? I asked, setting my suitcase down. David shifted uncomfortably, his hands in his pockets. Let's sit, he said, gesturing to the couch. But I stayed standing, my back straight, my voice steady. I'm not here for pleasantries. David frowned, glancing at Clara. What's this about, Mom? He asked. I opened my suitcase and pulled out the leather folder, holding it like a shield. It's about your father's will. The real one. Clara's smile faltered, just for a second, but I caught it. David's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? The will was settled years ago, I shook my head, my heart pounding with a strange exhilaration. Not all of it. There's more. David. More than you know. I opened the folder, letting them see the documents. The signatures. The numbers that would change everything. Clara stepped forward, her eyes sharp. What is this? Eleanor. Some kind of stunt. I met her gaze, unflinching. It's the truth. Thomas left me in charge of the trust. Not you. Not David. Me. And I've decided it's time to take it back. David's face paled, his mouth opening, but no words came out. Clara laughed. A brittle sound. You're bluffing. You can't just waltz in here, and I cut her off. My voice cold. I'm not bluffing. I've already spoken to Marcus. The process has started. The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. David finally spoke, his voice low. Why are you doing this? Mom. What do you want? I looked at him. My son. The boy I'd loved more than life itself. And felt a pang of sorrow beneath the anger. I wanted you to be the man your father believed you could be. I said. But you left me at the station. David. You chose her over me. And now you'll see what that choice costs. Clara's hand gripped his arm, her nails digging in. Don't listen to her. David. She's trying to manipulate you. But David's eyes were on me, searching, maybe seeing me for the first time in years. What's in the trust? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. I closed the folder, my hand steady. Everything you thought you had and more. Properties, accounts, shares, things you didn't even know existed. His face crumpled, a mix of shock and something else, guilt. Maybe. Or fear. Clara's voice cut through, sharp and desperate. This is ridiculous. We'll fight this. Eleanor. You won't win. I smiled. A small, dangerous thing. You can try, I said. But I've spent years preparing for this. You haven't. I turned to leave, my suitcase in hand. But David's voice stopped me. Mom. Wait. I paused, my back to him, waiting. I'm sorry, he said, the words heavy, like they'd been trapped inside him for too long. I didn't turn around. Sorry isn't enough, I said. Not yet. I walked out, the door closing behind me. The sound final. The game had begun, and I was ready to play it to the end. The air outside was crisp, the kind of autumn chill that seeps into your bones and makes you feel alive. I walked down the street, away from the house, my heart racing with a strange mix of triumph and sorrow. David's apology echoed in my mind, but it was too little, too late. The folder in my suitcase felt heavier now, not with paper, but with the weight of what I was about to do. I wasn't just taking back the trust, I was taking back my life, my dignity, the years I'd spent in the shadow of his betrayal. But beneath the anger, there was a flicker of doubt, a whisper asking if I was going too far. I pushed it down, focusing on the plan. I checked into a small inn on the edge of town, a place where no one would look for me. The room was simple, with a single bed and a window overlooking the street. I sat at the desk, spreading the documents out, reading them again to be sure. Every page was a reminder of Thomas's faith in me, his trust that I'd protect what he'd built. I'd failed him by letting Clara and David take so much, but I wouldn't fail him now. I called Marcus again, my voice steady as I outlined the next steps. Start the transfers, I said. I want the accounts frozen by tomorrow. He didn't question me, just promised to get it done. That night, I dreamed of David as a boy, running through the fields behind our old house, his laughter bright and free. In the dream, I called to him, but he didn't turn back. He kept running, fading into the distance, until he was gone. I woke with a start, my chest tight, tears stinging my eyes. For a moment, I wanted to call it all off, to go back to the way things were, to forgive him. But then I remembered the station, the rain, the silence of my phone. He'd made his choice, and I had to make mine. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from David. "We need to talk. Please, Mom." I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let him stew in the uncertainty I'd created. But another part, the part that still loved him despite everything, needed to see his face, to hear what he'd say. I texted back, agreeing to meet at a cafe in town. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting alone, his shoulders slumped. He looked older than I remembered, lines creasing his face, his eyes tired. "Mom," he said as I sat down, his voice soft. "I didn't mean to leave you at the station. Things got complicated." I raised an eyebrow, my heart hardening. "Complicated how?" He hesitated, glancing around as if Clara might appear. Clara didn't want me to come. She said it was a bad time, that we had too much going on. I leaned back, my arms crossed. "And you listened to her?" "Like always." His face flushed, but he didn't argue. "I'm trying to fix this," he said. "I don't know what you're planning with the trust, but I don't want to lose you." His words hit me like a wave, stirring the love I'd buried beneath my anger. But I couldn't let it sway a minute yet. "You already lost me, David," I said, my voice steady. "When you chose her over me, when you left me standing in the rain. This isn't about the money. It's about what you did to us." He looked down, his hands clenched on the table. "I know I messed up," he said, "but I'm here now. Doesn't that count for something?" I studied him, searching for the boy I'd raised. But all I saw was the man who'd betrayed me. "I need time," I said finally, standing to leave. "And you need to think about what you really want." I walked out, my heart pounding, the folder in my suitcase a reminder of the power I held. David's words had shaken me, but they hadn't changed my mind. Not yet. I needed to see this through, to make him understand the cost of his choices. But as I walked back to the inn, a small part of me wondered if there was still a way to save him, to bring him back to me. The inn's quiet was a stark contrast to the chaos in my mind. I sat by the window, watching the street below, the folder open on the desk. Marcus had called earlier, confirming the accounts were frozen. David and Clara would notice soon, if they hadn't already. I imagined Clara's face, her composure cracking as she realized her perfect life was slipping away. The thought brought a grim satisfaction, but it was fleeting. Beneath it, the ache for my son lingered, a wound that wouldn't heal. I wanted justice. Yes, but I also wanted him back, the real David, not the stranger he'd become. My phone buzzed again, this time with a voicemail from Clara. Her voice was sharp, barely controlled. "Eleanor, what have you done? Call me back. Now." I deleted it, my hand steady. She didn't scare me anymore. She thought she could bully me into submission, but she didn't know who she was dealing with. I wasn't the same woman who'd let her push me out of my son's life. I was ready to fight, and I had the upper hand. I spent the day going through the documents, making notes, planning my next move. Marcus had suggested a meeting with David and Clara, a chance to lay everything out. "It's risky," he'd said, "but it could force their hand." I agreed. I wanted to see their faces when they realized the truth, when they saw what I'd been holding on to all these years. I texted David, Setting the meeting for tomorrow at Marcus's office. Bring Clara, I added. This concerns her too. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept drifting to the past, to the days when David and I were a team, when he'd look at me with trust, not suspicion. I remembered the summer he turned 12, when we'd spent weeks fixing up an old boat, laughing as we sanded the wood, our hands covered in sawdust. He'd been so proud when we finally took it out on the lake, his smile brighter than the sun. Where had that boy gone? Had I failed him? Or had the world changed him? The questions gnawed at me, but I had no answers. The next morning, I dressed carefully, choosing a dark blazer and a scarf Thomas had given me years ago. It felt like armor, a reminder of who I was. When I arrived at Marcus's office, David and Clara were already there, sitting across from each other, their faces tense. Clara's eyes narrowed as I walked in, but I ignored her, focusing on David. He looked tired, his shoulders hunched, his hands fidgeting. Mom, he said, his voice low. What's this about? I set the folder on the table, my movements deliberate. It's about the truth, I said. Marcus took over, explaining the trust, the hidden assets, the power I held. Clara's face went white, her lips pressed into a thin line. David stared at the documents, his eyes wide, as if seeing them for the first time. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, his voice breaking. I met his gaze, my heart aching but my resolve firm. Because you weren't ready, I said. You chose her over me. David, you left me behind. Clara slammed her hand on the table, her voice rising. This is absurd. You can't take everything from us. I leaned forward, my voice calm but unyielding. I already have, I said. The accounts are frozen. The properties are being transferred. You thought you'd won, Clara, but you didn't know the whole game. She stared at me, her eyes blazing, but I didn't flinch. David's voice cut through, soft and desperate. Mom, please. There has to be another way. I looked at him, my son, and for a moment, I saw the boy I'd loved. But the woman I'd become wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. Prove you're worth it, I said. Then we'll talk. The meeting left me drained, but I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. I walked through the city, the folder tucked safely in my suitcase, my steps lighter despite the weight of what I'd done. David's face haunted me as shock, his desperation, the flicker of guilt in his eyes. Part of me wanted to run back to him, to tell him it could all be fixed, that I'd give him everything if he'd just come back to me. But the other part, the part that had stood in the rain at the station, kept me moving forward. He needed to learn, to understand the cost of his choices. Back at the inn, I pored over the documents again, double-checking every detail. Marcus had been thorough, but I needed to be sure. The trust was ironclad, designed to protect Thomas's legacy from anyone who didn't deserve it. Clara didn't. And David, my David, hadn't proven he did either. But his words at the meeting, "There has to be another way," kept echoing in my mind, stirring something I didn't want to feel, hope. Could he change? Could he find his way back to me? I pushed the thought aside, focusing on the plan. The next day, David called. I let it go to voicemail, my heart pounding as I listened to his voice. Mom, I'm sorry. I know I've messed up. Please, let's talk. Just you and me. I sat on the bed, staring at the phone, my fingers itching to call him back. But I couldn't, not yet. I needed to see what he'd do, how far he'd go to make things right. I texted him instead, keeping it short. Meet me at the old lake house tomorrow. Alone. The lake house was where we'd fixed the boat, where we'd been happiest. If there was any chance for us, it would start there. The drive to the lake house was long, the road winding through forests that glowed gold in the autumn light. When I arrived, the house was just as I remembered it, small, weathered, with a porch overlooking the water. I stood there, breathing in the crisp air, memories flooding back. David arrived an hour later, his car pulling up slowly, as if he was afraid to face me. He stepped out, alone, his face drawn. "Mom," he said, stopping at the edge of the porch. "I came." I nodded, my throat tight. "I see that." We sat on the porch, the silence heavy between us. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. I didn't know about the trust. Clara, she told me everything was settled. I trusted her. I looked at him, searching his eyes for the truth. "And you didn't trust me," I said. He flinched, his hands clenching. "I should have. I know that now." I wanted to believe him, but years of hurt held me back. "Why now, David?" I asked. "Because of the money. Or because you're afraid?" He looked out at the lake, his eyes distant. "Because I miss you," he said. "I miss us. I didn't realize how much until you walked into that meeting with those papers. I thought I was doing the right thing, building a life with Clara. But I lost you in the process." His words hit me hard, cracking the wall I'd built around my heart. But I couldn't let go of the anger. "Not yet. You left me at the station," I said, my voice shaking. "You chose her over me." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you let me." I stood, walking to the edge of the porch, my hands gripping the railing. The lake was still, reflecting the sky like a mirror. I wanted to forgive him, to pull him into my arms like I did when he was a boy. But trust was a fragile thing, and he'd broken it too many times. "I need more than words," I said finally. "Show me you mean it." He nodded, his face determined. "I will," he said. "I promise." As he drove away, I felt the first stirrings of hope, but I wasn't ready to let go of the keys just yet. The lake house became my refuge over the next few days. I stayed there, sorting through the documents, my memories, my heart. David's promise lingered, but I wasn't ready to trust it. Not yet. I spent my mornings walking the shore, the cold water lapping at my boots, my mind wrestling with what came next. The anger that had driven me was fading, replaced by a quiet resolve to find a way forward, not just for me, but for us. If David was serious, if he could prove himself, maybe there was a chance to rebuild what we'd lost. But it wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be quick. Marcus called with updates. The transfers were complete, the accounts fully under my control. Clara had hired a lawyer, but Marcus was confident they had no case. "She's desperate," he said. "David's not fighting as hard as she is." That gave me pause. Was David pulling away from her? Was he starting to see her for what she was? I didn't know, but the thought gave me hope, fragile as it was. I told Marcus to hold off on any further moves. I needed time to see what David would do. A week later, he showed up at the lake house again, unannounced. He looked different, less polished, more like the boy I remembered. He carried a box, old and dusty, and set it on the porch. "I found this in the attic," he said. "It's yours." I opened it, my breath catching. Inside were letters, photos, small things I'd thought were lost mementos of our life before Clara. "I didn't know she'd hidden them," he said, his voice thick. "I'm sorry," I looked at him, my eyes stinging. Why now? I asked again. He met my gaze, his own steady. Because I want to be your son again. We spent the day talking. Really talking. For the first time in years. He told me about Clara. How she'd controlled everything. How he'd been too blind to see it. He told me about the station. How she'd convinced him not to go. How he'd regretted it the moment he agreed. I listened. My heart softening, but still guarded. I can't undo what I've done, he said. But I can try to make it right. I nodded, my hands clutching the box of memories. It's a start, I said. That night, I made a decision. I called Marcus and told him to release a portion of the trust, not all of it, but enough to show David I was listening. Set up a meeting. I said, I want to give him a chance. The meeting was set for the following week. And when David arrived, I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. Hope. I laid out the terms. The trust would be his. But only if he proved himself. Not just to me, but to the legacy his father left behind. Clara didn't come to the meeting. David said she'd left, unable to handle the truth about the trust. About him. I didn't know if it was true, but I chose to believe him, to give him the chance he was asking for. As we signed the papers, I felt a weight lift, not just from the trust, but from my heart. I'd come to the station seeking revenge, but I'd found something else: redemption. For both of us. I looked at David, my son, and saw the boy I'd loved, the man he could become. Don't let me down, I said, my voice soft but firm. He nodded, his hand reaching for mine. I won't, he promised. And for the first time in years, I believed him. The keys to his inheritance were his now. But more than that, I'd given him back the key to my heart.